I have
Yeah,
needs.
so the good father went to Brandeis, right? Brandeis High School, is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah.
Brandeis. I
Right
don't
on
know.
Like
84th.
I never heard of
86,
it.
right? 86th Street off Amsterdam, or
84th.
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 Oh, okay.
84th.
Yeah, I know it. Sure.
Oh, yeah, I
Fantastic.
don't know it. I never heard of it. Okay. Oh,
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. I used to go out there actually with my cousin and your sister, because you guys grew up, what, 100, 103?
106.
106, yeah,
Yeah.
right where Yvonne
Yeah.
grew up.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
Brandeis High School was first Jewish
public.
Supreme Court?
Supreme Court Justice. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Louis Brandeis. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think I'm recording at the moment, but I'm not quite sure. But don't worry.
I ordered your book yesterday, by the way, Father.
Good. Very good.
Yeah, so I eagerly await so I could read it. So
do you feel comfortable with us calling you Father? Would that be okay?
Yes. We're good. We're good.
Sure. All right.
I'm very good. Yeah.
It's either that or we could call you future Pope. It's up to you.
Well, let's not get our
Be
hopes up
presumptuous,
too high.
right?
Maybe
No, but come on, that's happened many times in history, right? Didn't Padre Pio see the would-be John Paul II and declare when he
I
was
don't know, but I'm happy
that you will be Pope?
selected.
Well, it's a tough job, right? Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Second in difficulty to what? Mayor of New York, and then after that, President of the United States, more or less. Right? And manager of the New York Yankees or something like
Thank
that,
you,
right?
sir.
Right, sure.
So let me just introduce you, if I may.
Okay.
So we are very blessed to have before us the very Reverend Father Mario Alexis Portella. Okay, is Chancellor of the Archdiocese of Florence. He received his BA in Government and Politics at St. John's University in New York. He holds an MA in Medieval History from Fordham University in the Bronx. Bronx or Manhattan?
The Bronx.
Bronx, there you go. Good, bring it back home. And studied at the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome, where he received a doctorate in canon law and a doctorate in civil law. He's the author of Abyssinian Christianity, the First Christian Nation, which was published in 2012, and Ethiopian and Eritrean Monasticism, interesting, the Spiritual and Cultural Heritage of Two Nations, which was published in 2015. And his most recent book is Islam, Religion of Peace, The Violation of Natural Rights and Western Cover-Up, which was published in 2018. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And you also played basketball for St. John's. And Roxanne told
I
me.
probably would, yeah, and I also played ice hockey for the Soviets.
More or less.
That's good. That's good.
Oh, fantastic. So I think what we want to do is, what I want to do, if we can, is just get a real an understanding of the basic facts of Christian persecution in the world, beginning with maybe Boko Haram, and get a sense after we establish what those facts are, maybe talk about what the causes, underlying causes might be. And I guess in terms of establishing the facts, I want to understand whether this is a growing trend of Christian persecution in the world, or whether we reached some sort of a high point here, and maybe we could see better things coming.
Well, I think we have to start. The answer is yes, but in order to understand why it's happening this way, we have to see it when it started. I remember when the Syro-Catholic Patriarch of Antioch, Joseph Yunan, whom I have a friendship with, he came to Florence in 2018 or 2019, early 2019, this book launch for my book over here. And before the actual book presentation and the talks, we had a private session with the media, and one of the questions that was asked of him, understanding that Antioch is the first see before Rome that was established by St. Peter. It was the place where where the followers of Jesus were called Christians for the first time in Syria. He is now in Lebanon, in Beirut, because they were expelled by the Turks in the beginning of the 20th century, before the Kemalist revolution that secularized the country. And the question he was asked, when did this Christian persecution begin? They were expecting answers, well, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So he said, well, we have to go back 1600 years ago. I beg your pardon, 1400 years ago, meaning when the Prophet Muhammad started Islam. And just for clarification, even in my book, when I speak of the Prophet Muhammad, I identify him as that it's not an acknowledgement that he is a prophet of God. It's just an historical appellation that I just use.
Sure.
We just have to see that this Christian persecution began from the very inception of Islam, keeping in mind that with the jihad in this sense, because jihad means, one of the meanings is to struggle for Allah, fight in Allah, was channeled into fighting. You have the first jihad immediately after the Prophet's death with his successor Abu Bakr, the so-called Rida Wars, the wars of apostasy, when the Arabs within the newly conquered area after Muhammad went back to Mecca from Medina, when the Arabs and the remaining Qurashi peoples did not want to submit. So right from the very beginning, with the Prophet, these wars began of conquest. It's not so much the very fact as being anti-Christian, which is a huge part of it, in as much as it is being anti anyone who's not Muslim.
Right. So I suppose the primary question is whether this is a matter of practice, the conflict that we're seeing, or is it a matter of the fundamental dimensions, aspects of the religion of Islam. And we could also talk about, in that respect, whether Christianity has the same martial orientation. I guess that's what we're suggesting here.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Very good questions, because a lot of, if I may just redirect things here a bit, a lot of people will bring up the Crusades, for example, or the Holy Inquisition, for example. Keeping in mind that the Crusades were a reaction to when Muslims were taking our lands at the behest of the Byzantine Emperor. First, it's not doctrine. And even if it were doctrine, it was something, let's say, legitimate, but it's not doctrine. Islam, that fighting to not just convert, but to impose, is part of their doctrine. Okay. The decapitations, what ISIS is, this is exactly what the Prophet Muhammad did. This is part of the hadiths, not the Quran. Okay, the hadiths, because the Quran is basically what they call munsal, the recordings of Allah, the literal words of Allah that have to be applied. They cannot be interpreted. How they're applied according to the acts and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad contained in the hadiths. And this is where we have the problem with Islam, because you have to imitate the Prophet as best as you can in order to make sure that Allah will recognize you dignified enough to join him in heaven. So this is part of their doctrine. And some of the Crusades were horrible, especially the Crusade, the sack of Constantinople in 1215, which, by the way, was carried out by the Venetians without the permission of the Pope. The Pope actually, months later, after he found out, not only did he condemn that crusade, but he excommunicated the Venetians, Pope Innocent III. Just important to know these things, because that in itself, again, it's not part of church doctrine. It's not part of the Holy Gospels. That fighting to convert, if they do not convert, well, off with your head, or with the toll tax with the Christians and the Jews, the people of the book, that they show tolerance. Okay, they show tolerance to Christians and Jews if they cough up money. Okay, but what about the others? I mean,
May I say one thing, Father, if you don't mind? It seems as though the average person is ignorant to the fact of Muhammad as a person. Most people don't realize that he took over lands and raped and pillaged and had slaves and numerous wives. I mean, so if you compare that to Jesus, who said, turn the other cheek, I mean, it's a totally different person, or if we use the term prophet. I'm baffled how someone could say Muhammad was the last prophet. It seems to me his beliefs and teachings are a complete change from Jesus. How do they fit that in? Let's say the average Muslim, where they will honor Jesus as a prophet, but Muhammad is the last prophet. But if you look at them as men, their way they live their lives are totally on different sides of the spectrum.
Very good question. There are 2 points here in answering. First of all, when they see Jesus as a prophet, they see him as someone who prepared the path for Muhammad. And how they mention Jesus, they mention that he is the Messiah. But Messiah for them is literally someone who has been purified by Allah from his own sins. They reject the divinity of Jesus. Hence, that's why they rejected the Holy Trinity. So we have to see how they classify Jesus, which is different as we Christians accept Jesus. So we have to see that. Secondly, we have to see is that you and I here in the West, we may be baffled, as you said, by how they can just follow what he did. The problem here is that our reason tells us, well, we can't be doing this. I know my reason tells me I cannot have sex, as a 50-year-old man with a 9-year-old girl. My reason tells me just because someone does not agree off with his head. The problem here, with Islam and the observance of the Sharia, which is the law to be observed every day derived from the Quran and the Hadiths, is that reason does not come in. Reason cannot come in because our conscience will tell us this. For the average Muslim, their conscience is the Sharia,
right?
Quran, the Hadiths. They cannot reason.
Right.
We know we do not need religion, and this is a bit of natural law, perhaps for a different time. The law of God that is written in our hearts, where we know right from wrong. For example, if I may, when Cain killed his brother Abel, he knew what he did was right. I beg your pardon. He knew what he did was wrong. A Freudian slip there. Okay, he knew what he did was wrong, but there was no commandment saying "Thou shalt not kill."
Right.
The commandments were not there, but he knew that inherently.
Oh, very good point.
That's the natural law. He knew that.
Very interesting.
With Islam, it's right or wrong only if Allah says so.
Yeah.
It's only theology. It's not theology and reason, as you said in your book.
Yeah.
We have the Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian roots. So we have theology, but reason. If you only have theology, then you have a theocracy. One dominant person, a dictator.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, can I just ask for a moment? So the hadiths, is there a unanimity of opinion on the hadiths when it comes to the question of jihad? I guess we have to beg what we mean by jihad, but essentially, if I could just suggest, are we suggesting the subjugation and/or the oppression and/or the murder of non-believers? And I guess there's a different orientation towards the Muslim vis-a-vis the Jews vis-a-vis the Christians and other groups, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. But anyway, okay, so if we say that, if we're talking about that, which we could generally, I suppose, from a Western point of view, call a jihad, are the hadiths on the same page about that, or is there a conflict amongst them?
Oh, no, very much so. But keep in mind, you have the division in Islam between the Sunnis and the Shiites. They both have their own hadiths, their own collection of hadiths. The Shiites don't accept the Sunnis.
Right. One's more conservative, right? The Wahhabism that they're pushing.
No, the
That's different.
Wahhabi,
Oh, it's different.
Wahhabism is named after this so-called Islamic theologian in the
Gotcha.
Arabia. His form on how to apply the Sharia. But with the hadiths, the Sunnis have 6 major collections, canons. Okay, keeping in mind that most of these hadiths were written a good 200 years after the death of the Prophet.
Yeah.
The main hadith is Al-Bukhari.
Yes.
And the Shiites rely upon. For example, and that's the real core, because for the average Muslim, the Sunnis specifically, that's equivalent to the Quran. It's equivalent to, not in the same manner, but let's say the Quran is number 1. The Sunan al-Bukhari is number 1A, if I can. And we have so many ridiculous stories in there, that Muhammad once had the power, the strength of 30 men to have sex with his 11 wives that were alive all at one time. This is when we have the marriage with Aisha.
Right.
7-year-old whom he puts in a haram and then consumes marriage with her when she's 9 and he's in his mid-50s. That's where the orders to go out and kill, where it says, he who does not, he who changes his religion is to be killed. And on and on and on. Because the Quran mentions Muhammad just a handful of times at most. Just a handful of times. But the Quran says, this is my last prophet, this is how we have to imitate him. And to go back to the original question is because, and the reason why Muslims behave this way, and mind you, a lot of peaceful Muslims do not, but they will say, no, Christianity, no, you have to obey Allah, because if not, you're going to go to hell. They, unlike with us, bringing the fullness of who God is through Jesus Christ, we're doing it out of love.
Right.
To get to know God better for eternal happiness. For them, it's just because Allah has to reign, and the story. Allah does not care about his creation as we see, or how we understand God as Christians, a God who loves his creation. Like, it's not with them. So the only sure way that a Muslim can get to heaven is by imitating the Prophet. And this is where
it's by what?
Not good deeds. Not good deeds also, Father?
No, good deeds, it all depends. Good deeds do not mean that you're going to go to heaven, because you can go to heaven, but in the end, Allah is the one who decides, because you can be carrying out good deeds, but not, let's say, doing your Friday prayers, okay? Or let's say you did not perform your ablutions before the prayers. But interestingly enough, the hadiths of Al-Bukhari, numerous times you have Muhammad offering his prayers without performing the ablution. So there are a lot of contradictions. But the point is that reason just does not.
It's built on fear, not on love and
exactly
good deeds like Catholics and free will, right?
Yeah, it's even let's say very Old Testament.
Gotcha.
Old Testament, which we as Christians, we read the Old Testament, putting it into historical context, allegorical in many ways, not fundamentally.
Yeah.
Literally, because we cannot believe. I know I just cannot believe in a God who loves, and it's okay. You don't obey. I'm gonna make sure your
So,
son is
so,
every.
so is it proper to characterize their point of view, their theology, as being formalistic or being very legalistic? Is that what we're saying
Correct.
here?
Yeah, correct.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. But more so because at least we can see that in the Old Testament, at least God still keeps his alliance with the Jews because he cares for them.
Mm-hmm.
With the Quran, he does not.
Mm.
With the Quran, he does not. And I mention in my book, the fourth chapter in my book, which is, I would say, in my own opinion, the pivotal chapter because I
Mm.
go into the difference between the Christian understanding of God and the Islamic concept.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the fundamental part for the Sharia because it's how the average Muslim responds to his God. And so based on that, as you said, fear. He wants to go to heaven.
Do they not have a conception of a loving God? And do they
No,
not have a personal relationship with a loving God?
no.
No,
But
it's
it's funny
impossible.
because
He
many of my
says there's a veil. I believe in the Quran there's a veil that
Yeah.
prevents you from being
well,
in
I mean, it's
contact
very
with
interesting. I'm just saying
Muhammad.
it begs another question because a lot of the Muslims that are my dear friends who I live with here in Europe, I'm sorry, they seem to suggest that God is of love and they have a loving relationship with God. And I'm just wondering whether that's a cultural
No,
difference
no,
for
okay,
because they live amongst Christians and hence they have that theology.
okay. Two things. First of all, there's the 90 names of Allah, the beneficent, the all loving, the merciful, the all kind. When we say God is good, God is love, that's an attribute of God.
Mm-hmm.
When they say God the magnificent, God the merciful, that's not an attribute of God because they cannot know God.
Mm-hmm.
God is God is transcendent.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot know who God is. You can only know Allah's divine will.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they say God the all merciful, God the beneficent, these are actions that Allah takes towards man, like giving a gift. But that does not mean that he himself is all good because then now we know we cannot know God. No, for them, they cannot know uh, who God
Okay,
is.
so in their theology, they cannot know who God is. They resign that idea or certainty. But from a Christian point of view, we believe we know some things about the nature of God, and we
Yeah,
believe that God is essentially good, right?
yeah.
He's
And
or
for them,
maybe even the source of all that's good, the source that's all that beautiful and true,
yeah.
right? That's
But
typical and beautiful.
God is also good. Okay? God
Right.
is love. For them, no, it's impossible because
Ah,
then they cannot know the substance of who God is. The only thing they can know of their God is His divine will, as written in the Quran and lived out by the Prophet Muhammad.
so
May,
this
may I
so
say one thing,
yeah,
Chris?
please.
When we were in Spain a couple of years ago,
Excuse me.
I saw a video. I forget the professor's name, but he said in the end times,
Mhm.
the Muslims believe there are two Jesuses that will come, our Jesus and theirs, and their
No,
Jesus. Is that true or?
no, that's not true.
Okay, okay.
That's not true at all because they believe that Jesus, as with the other prophets, will come before to make sure that because they have to accompany the last prophet,
Yeah,
Muhammad. But no, it's not that case. The the Shiites are a bit more apocalyptic
Mhm.
with that because they're more, let's say, somewhat agnostic.
Mhm.
They believe many of them believe in free will,
gotcha.
which do not. Okay? But the free will has to be oriented by Allah. Um, they believe again the Shiites, which for about 10% of Muslims in the world,
Mhm.
this is but 85, 87%. and then you have a few, let's say, million of Sufis, so on and so forth. But the Shiites are much more apocalyptic than the Sunnis.
Mm.
And which is why, for example, if I can not to shift gears, with the building of the nuclear bomb that they want to do,
Yeah.
they have this this teaching that their 12th Imam, because remember, for the Shiites, they believe in the blood succession of Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
The first caliph would be Muhammad Ali. For the Sunnis, Muhammad Ali would be the fourth caliph. The first one would be Abu
Right,
Bakr.
right.
So after the 11th Imam died, he had no male successor. The Shiite jurists in the 8th, 9th century, I don't remember exactly, that's why you write books, that way you don't have to remember. Said that, okay, they created this teaching that the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, went into hiding, into sleep, and he will be woken up in the last time, and he can only be woken up with apocalyptic explosions. And so it's very dangerous with that, which is why their terrorism is state-sponsored. It's more potent, but because it's centralized, but at least we can pinpoint them down. With their Sunnis, they believe in the fact that there will be a second coming of the Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Jesus, but they do not believe in this 12th Mahdi. However, with their terrorism, they do not need permission from the Imam to carry out their attacks. So in that sense, it can be perhaps not more, it's not a centralized one, but it's very difficult to pick who's who, because they mostly need permission. They need the blessings of an Imam. The Sunnis do not.
Did you suggest that the Shiites believe in free will, but the Sunnis don't believe in free will? Is that what you?
Many Shiites do. Because again, their exterior difference is mostly based on rituals. The Sunnis will, when they kneel, when they pray, they'll have their hands crossed. The Shiites will just have their hands on the sides, for example. So it's really just based on that, but a lot, it depends which Imam they call them. Keep in mind that, for example, these are the 12er Shiites, primarily in Iran, after the 12th Imam. Then you have the Alawite Shiites, the ones that the Syrian president Assad belongs to. And so they're set within, let's say, the sect according to the Sunnis. The Sunnis see the Shiites as heretics and vice versa.
Interesting. I think we're running out of time in this session, but I would like to just ask you quickly, if we can, about Boko Haram and how maybe this theology plays into the violence that we're seeing against Christians. First of all, is it fair to say that attacks on Christians around the world are growing? Would you say that's a fact?
Very much so. It has really grown within the last, I would say, and I've got criticisms for this, but a good, let's say...
Don't worry, we won't tell anyone, so please, all private.
It was a good 10, 15 years after the Six-Day War between with Israel, because that woke Islam up.
I mean, Chris, we spoke about this in France. I mean, the desecration of churches in France. Look what's happening in the United States.
Mm.
A priest was beheaded in France a couple of
Yeah.
years back.
Outside of Rouen.
All the
Yeah.
churches
Yeah, and
being
it's
destroyed.
just that now, before it used to be, let's say, anti um, Israel, anti-United States. Now it's really just, hey, this is our chance now.
Yeah.
Go to Boko Haram. Okay. What they have, their madrasas, their schools where they teach the little boys how to memorize the Quran and then apply it. You have what they call the Al-Majari boys. Al-Majari boys comes from the Hijra, the migration, where in the Quran it says, okay, you have to go out and seek knowledge. You have a lot of these boys wandering in the streets in Nigeria, very poor with little cans or collection plates.
Yes.
A lot of them come from very rich families, but they're sent over there because they have to gain knowledge. It's an honor for a family to have one of the boys doing that. And so from very young, and they wander the streets, but they're indoctrinated
Goodness.
at a very, very young age.
Mm.
So once they grow up, they become 16, 18 years old, it's only logical that they go out and hate Christians. They go out and kill Christians. Because, let's go back to the Hadiths. This is where the problem is.
Mm.
This is what Muhammad did. And so it's really increased very much. The other, I mentioned the 6-day war in Israel that woke Islam up, but the watershed movement, the watershed moment that triggered all of this Christian persecution against those in Africa, in the Middle East, was the 1979 revolution in Iran.
Yeah.
When the first time you have a cleric, first time in the history of Islam, you have a cleric running a nation under Sharia law.
Really?
I did not know that. Interesting. Ayatollah Khomeini, right?
Yeah. That jihad was extended then to the entire West. And hence, we're now going to go after the Christians. And then there's the link. It took a little while. It took about a good 10, 20 years for that, what we're seeing with this Christian persecution, Christian genocide. They're most going back to Nigeria. That's where they're being killed out the most, and no one is saying anything. No one is absolutely.
So are we suggesting then that the increase in persecution against Christians around the world, especially by non-Christian forces outside of the West, I would imagine that's what we're saying for the most part here, is it because of those political historical events, the 6-day war and also the Islamic Revolution? So is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, I would say that the 6-day war, mind you already had conflict between these.
Yeah, well, the formation, let's say the refoundation of the state of Israel, I guess that would be.
Yeah, it woke Islam up because it was dormant after the Kemalist revolution when he secularized Turkey.
Yeah,
when he got rid of the caliphate. A lot of people, and I think it was the former prime minister of Iraq, who said that in the 1960s, yes, we said our prayers, but we didn't know the Quran, kind of like today's Catholics. They really don't know anything about our Catholic faith. But it was not until the 70s, and then there were other factors there with the Muslim Brotherhood that was there immediately after the Kemalist revolution. But the 6-day war was the point. Now we have a justification. Although the 6-day war, with the Arab League, it was a very focalized jihad directed to a few states. The 1979 revolution, basically when a small country like Iran held America by the palm of its hands.
Yes. And they're being propped up, Father, as you would admit, with the petrodollars, this new wealth, right?
Yeah.
From Saudi
And-
Arabia.
yeah.
So that
And
is giving them
let's not forget
Mm.
the other superpower that was also defeated by Islam and hence by the Sunnis, that started in 1979, ended in the mid 1980s, the Soviet Union
Mm.
in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
You have the Sunni uprising. And now these little people here, CIA operatives like Osama bin Laden, become state players
Mhm.
within this Islamic world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then, but it's I personally hold the watershed moment was the Islamic Revolution. Because keeping
Yeah.
in mind that there's a deeper link, religious link with Muslims in Shiism than in Sunnism. There is, to go back, Chris, I think you asked about the point of good works. They believe that Allah will look at their good works.
Mhm.
The Sunnis, well, it depends which Imam
Yeah.
you're talking to.
Yeah.
But it really, and so this, and what's really happening in Nigeria, to go back to Nigeria, it's a genocide. It's a complete genocide.
Mm.
And they know they can get away with it because they have a Muslim president,
Right.
Muhammad Buhari,
Goodness.
who is
Yeah.
coming from the Fulani movement. And when he was a general, he stated,
Yeah.
he keep on this to make sure that the Sharia governs the land.
Goodness. I think we should end this session on this point. It's a
Okay.
wonderful place to end, I think, at this time, and maybe to pick up. If you would have us, that'd be wonderful. It's such a blessing to have you. I have to
Yes, it
thank
is.
you so much for your time.
No, it's a
And
blessing.
goodness,
And
oh, I learned so much. We've spoken twice now, and I've learned so much. I have to say,
Same here.
I see my synapses working quite brilliantly right now since my two discussions with you. But would it be possible to speak to you within another 2 weeks, perhaps? I mean, we could pick up from here about the specifics about Boko Haram, and I would like to go on to the persecution of the church within Syria, and we could talk about Erdogan and move on to China. I know it's quite a lot, but yeah. Otherwise, we're gonna have to go to Niria, and ask.
I'll have your book by then, and we can talk about your book.
Roxanne, right?
We could talk about your book.
Oh yeah, we're gonna read your book. I'm gonna
I'll
have
have
to
your book, and I'll have it by then.
And my book, you'll see, it's very well. It took me 2 years to write. 3 years, if you want to include, it was a development for my doctoral dissertation, as I mentioned in my book. But everything, for example, what you will see, all of the sources when I say about Allah cannot be known, whatever, I go right back to their own
sources,
scholars, their own theologians on their sources, because I tell people, hey, listen, when Neil Armstrong went to the moon and came back, he didn't bring this back. I didn't get this from the moon or from planet Jupiter. It's their own texts.
All right.
except for the Dutch government that proclaimed that the moon rock that came to them is a fake. Have you heard about that? We'll talk later.